Welcome to this Titan tutorial on client options and quick launch configuration. To access the options in the Titan client, go into the application menu and select the options button. This will bring up the list of options and configuration set up for the Titan client. The first is the visual appearance. This is just going to be the look and feel of the application and does not affect functionality. There are a number of different visual styles that are provided: Office 2007, Office 2003, and Visual Studio 2005. If I select one of these and click Apply, it's going to apply my new visual appearance configuration so you can take a look to see if it's what you like. I can change that to a different one and apply that as well. And now I'm going to change it back to Office 2007. Notice when I've selected Office 2007, a color scheme is available. By changing this and applying, you keep the same visual style, but just change the color scheme. The next configuration setting under Options is the connection settings. These are the settings used to connect to the application server: the server name or address and the port number. In general, these don't get changed. The miscellaneous settings allow for you to set up the shell, the client, to run in kiosk mode. What this means is that when the application is run, no username or password is required. It automatically logs in to a certain user set up in this configuration. The final setting is the quick launch settings. These are the settings that are used by the system when using the quick launch in the upper right corner of the application. These are ordered in a particular order, and this is how the search is performed, starting at the top and moving down. So in the current configuration, the first thing that the quick launch will look for is a storage location code, followed by a work order number, a sample field sample number, a container number, and then an aliquot label. To control the order of this, use the up and down arrows. You can edit one of these by clicking on one of these configuration buttons. You can also add and remove these quick launch settings. Let's add a new one. I click on Add, and I'm presented with a business object and property. So first I need to select the business object. From the drop-down, I'm going to select Project because I'm going to do some searches by project. And then the property will be filled in based on that business object selected. Any of these can be used for your quick launch. I'm going to stick with code. I'm going to click OK. Notice that added it to the bottom of my list. But I might be doing a lot of project code searches using the quick launch. So I'm going to move that up to the top by using the up arrow. Now the first thing that gets checked is for a project code. And that's the way I want it to function because that's the way I'm going to do most of my searches. I'm going to go ahead and apply this and say OK. And now I'm going to go into the quick launch and actually type in one of my project codes. What this is going to do is it's going to search for one, and if it finds it, it's going to actually bring up the details directly into Titan. If I were to type in one that does not exist, it's going to prompt me saying that no records were found based on the configuration. Let's also check to make sure that storage locations work. So I'm going to type in a storage location code, and it brought me to that code. I'll go ahead and try one more. I'll try a field sample number. And this brought up the sample with that field sample number. It's important to note that these configuration settings are saved per installation, so it's not per user based. That means that a computer at an installation can have its own quick launch settings. So logging in to a lab machine can act completely different in terms of quick launch than logging in your office. Titan has the ability to associate images and files with individual records. If we look at contacts, I'm going to go ahead and filter this down to a single contact, and I'm going to open up the details. You'll notice that there is an image control in the top left corner. You know this by the dotted line box and the Add Image link. To add an image, you can click on the link, and this will bring up a browser, so you can browse for which image you want to add. I'm going to select this one. When I click Open, you'll notice that the image is now associated with this contact. Once an image is associated, you can right-click to change that image. This will allow you to select a different image, like so. You can remove the image, and it will prompt you as to whether or not you'd like to do that. Let me associate the image in another way. If I open up Windows Explorer, I can simply drag and drop an image right over that control, and it will place that image in that control. Other options on the right-click menu are Open with External Application and Open Locally. This allows you to open the file in a different window so you can look at more details. So if I open this locally, you'll notice that I can resize this image so I can see further details. This helps you to really zoom in and focus on what the actual details are of that image, even though there's only a small image represented on the detail view. So that allows you to associate a single image and displays that image right there on the detail. Titan also allows you to associate any number of files in certain locations. So for example, if we take a look at instruments, I'm going to go ahead and open up an instrument. You'll notice that there is a document section on an instrument. If we go there, it displays a control very similar to Windows Explorer. This is showing you a list of all files that are associated with this current instrument. To add files, you can click on the Add button, and then you can browse for the file that you want. Let's say this user guide. Click Open, and then when we refresh that, you'll see that that file is now associated. You can also remove an image or a file by using this Remove button. But like the image control, you're also able to use drag and drop functionality. So if I open up Windows Explorer again, and I just drag that user guide over into that area, you'll notice that it's already associated. You can also drag multiple things all at one time. You can also use copy and paste. So you can highlight a file on your operating system, go to Copy, come back over to the File Explorer inside of Titan, right-click, and you'll be presented with a paste option, and that will paste it. This file viewer also allows you to view files in different ways, just like in Windows Explorer. So if I right-click under View, I can look at my files in an icon view, a list view, the details view, which is the default view, as tiles, or in thumbnails. Another great thing about this file control inside of Titan is it allows you to simply double-click on one of these files, and it will open that file with the appropriate application based on your operating system. So if I double-click this user guide, that's a PDF, it's going to bring up my PDF viewer so I can directly look at this file. This makes associating images inside of Titan simple and easy to use. If I click on a customer's listing up at the top on the menu, you'll see that I'll get a listing of customers, and this is presented to us in a grid. The nice thing about Titan is that once you master how to manipulate one grid, you know how to manipulate all of them. So all you need to do is know the basic functionality of how grids work. Let's look at a customer detail. By double-clicking, I am now presented with the details of the customer. You'll notice that if I click on work orders, there is another grid listing all of the work orders associated with this customer. And you'll notice that it also looks very similar to the original listing of customers. That's because all grids in Titan act the same way. There are two main types of grids. First is the normal grid, which is what we've seen so far. There's also an auxiliary grid. If I go to the customer's contacts, you'll notice that there is a left column for available contacts, and then the right side is the grid of the associated contacts. Anytime you see an auxiliary grid, you're able to just select records from the left column and drag them over to the right column. This associates that contact with this customer. To remove the association, drag it back. This functionality also supports multiple records at one time. The same holds true for going the other way. But the true power of the grid comes in accessing your data. So let's move over to the laboratory section and take a look at all the samples. This is listing all the samples in the system, which is generally more information than you need. Usually what you'd like to do is filter this information. You'll notice that the first row is completely blank. This is actually the filter row. So one of the things that you can do with the filter row is you can go to, say, field sample number and just type in an individual sample that you're looking for. and it'll take you directly to that individual sample. To remove your filter, you can click on the Clear Filter button. This will clear the filter for that specific column that you're currently filtering. You'll also notice the Clear Filter button on the far left. Clicking this will remove the filter for the entire grid itself. So you can actually build up multiple filters in multiple columns all at one time. Filtering allows you to filter in different mechanisms. For example, for a string field, you can filter by starts with, contains, ends with, does not start with, does not contain, does not end with, does not match, not like. You can also do regular expression matching and using the like operator. For numeric type fields, you can use the common equals, does not equal, less than, greater than type. These also are functional for date ranges as well. So you can specify what type of filter you want to use, say starts with, and then start typing your filter. You'll also notice that there's a drop-down. This drop-down is useful because it comes with 3 different options. The first option is custom. This allows you to build a custom filter, which I'll show you in a moment. Then there's blanks and non-blanks. This allows you to quickly filter down to those rows that have either no data or do have data. So for assigned analyst, if I select blanks, this is now showing me all of the samples in the system that have not been assigned to an analyst. So it's very easy to just take a quick look at that. You'll also notice at the bottom of the grid that there's some text showing you what type of information has been selected. So in this case, 15 of the 76 total samples are currently being showed. So I know that there are 15 unassigned samples. If I swap this to the other one, the non-blanks, now we're dealing with all the records that have been assigned an analyst. So this is a quick and useful way of doing that. Let's look at that custom one. Let's take a date. So this requested due date. If we drop that down again, we can do the blanks and non-blanks, but the custom becomes much more powerful. If we click on this, we can now build up a custom filter that has multiple parts. For example, we can do a date range. Let's say it's greater than, and we specify a start date, and then we can add another filter and say that it's less than and put in another date. By doing that, it now filters all your data by that custom date range. I'm going to clear out this filter, and now I'm going to show you how you can quickly sort your data. Every single column is sortable, so if you wanted to sort this information by, let's say, the requested due date, just click on the column header. This now sorts it in ascending order. If you want to reverse the sorting, you just click that again. Now it's sorting in the opposite order. You can combine these sorts by holding down the Shift key. So now I'm sorted by requested due date descending, but type ascending. And you can combine these in any way that you want. The last and what I think is the most powerful tool is the grouping functionality. This allows you to just grab a column header and drag it up to the top here where it says drag column header to group. So let's say we drag type up there. You'll notice what it's done is it's now created these rows that are expandable. So what this is showing me is that I have 8 samples that are of type stormwater, 20 that are surface water, and 48 that are just regular water. And we can actually add more groupings to this. So if we want to group by the type and then by the state, what we're seeing now, if we expand water, we'll see that we have 3 different states, which is completed, created, and submitted. And we notice that now we know that we have 15 completed samples of type water in the system. And you can expand that and take a look at that. Same thing with created or submitted. This allows you to do all kinds of combinations of filtering, grouping, and sorting to access your data in a way that's meaningful to you. This is the power of the Titan Grid. Combo boxes in Titan have a number of functionality pieces that are associated with them. They make data entry and data retrieval, data creation so much easier than typical normal combo boxes. So let's go ahead and take a look at a combo box. I'm going to go into work orders. I'm going to go ahead and just create a new work order. So in a new work order, we've got a combo box for customer. This allows us to start typing directly, and it supports type ahead. You'll also notice that there is a magnifying glass when we have a selected record. The magnifying glass allows us to drill into the details of that specific record. If there isn't a record associated, notice how clicking the X will remove the association. You'll see a wand tool. If I click on the wand, it's going to allow me to create a brand new record for that particular drop-down. In this case, it was customer. So I can type in all my customer related information. So I'm just going to type in new customer here. Enter some required fields, type in other pieces of information. Then if I save and close this, notice how the customer now gets populated with that new customer that I created. This allows us to not have to leave the screen of what we're currently doing to actually create and generate new records. So every combo box comes with this functionality. I'm going to cancel the creation of this now, and I'm going to move to something like results. Inside of grids, there are also combo boxes. So if you notice as I hover over the aliquot column, you'll notice that there's a combo box there. And because there's an association there, you have the magnifying glass. So this allows us to, from result, take a look at the details of this aliquot. So let's go ahead and do that. So by clicking on the magnifying glass, it's going to bring up the details of that aliquot. The nice thing about this is you can continue to cascade these windows. So from here, let's say we wanted to take a look at the originating container. And now we have the originating container details, and we take a look at all kinds of pieces of information inside of that. And then let's say we want to take a look at the sample. So we can click on the magnifying glass for that. So anywhere you see a combo box, it supports type ahead, it supports the ability to drill down into the records associated with that combo box, and it also allows you to create a brand new record. The default workspace for Titan is the tab workspace. This is the workspace that all menu items open up to. Let's take a look at work orders. You'll notice that the work orders opens up in the tab workspace. If we open up another window for samples, another tab is added, and you could switch between these tabs. Let's open up a couple more, one for containers and one for aliquots. In the tab workspace, if you right click on a tab, you're presented with a number of options. You can close that tab, which closes the tab that you right clicked on. You can close all tabs. This is going to close every single tab that's open. Notice that clears out your workspace. Let me open a few more of these back up. And you can also close others. What this will do is this will close all the tabs currently open except for the one that you currently are on. So this leaves the aliquots. Let me open a few more of those tabs back up. The other thing that you can do with this tab workspace is you can split it. So if I want these containers to be in a new tab workspace, I can right click and choose new vertical or new horizontal tab group. Let me choose horizontal. You notice that the window is now split and we have two separate tab places that you can work with. If I right click on that containers tab, I can move it back to the original tab space. We can also split this vertically, and you can continuously split this as much as you want. So now you'll notice that I have the samples are on their own tab workspace, then the aliquots and work orders are on theirs, and containers are on theirs. You can also drag and drop these tab workspaces between each other. So if I wanted to move the samples over to the containers, I can drag that over and just add it. And again, you can right click and move to a previous tab group. There's also a number of options to dealing with the tab workspace in the application menu. If you go down to tabs, you'll notice that it lists all the tabs that are currently open. It also allows you to close all the tabs, and there's also an option to show tabs or not show tabs. If we uncheck that, it changes our workspace to be a multiple document interface type workspace, where each tab originally is now its own window, and these can just be moved around. You'll also notice that the application menu changes to windows rather than tabs. This allows you to do a number of different things with your windows. You can cascade them. You can also tile them. And you can also minimize them all. You'll notice that at the bottom now, all of those windows have been minimized. I can then expand those and take a look at them. You'll notice when I expand it to the full screen that you're presented with this minimize, restore, and close button up in the top right. So this will allow you to actually manipulate the window again. And then if I so desire, I can go back to this Windows and turn Show Tabs back on. And notice everything is back in its tab. So there's a number of different ways that you can manage your workspace inside of Titan to get the most out of it and be able to be the most productive. Titan allows you to directly import sample data from an Excel file. For example, if you have an Excel file like this, where the first row is all header information and all the following rows are data, you can import it using the bulk sample import tool. Let's take a look. Under the application menu, select bulk sample import. This will prompt you for which file you want to import. Click on Browse, select your Excel file, and click OK. This will bring up the utility that maps that file to Titan. At the top is some information about the work order. The top line is the main facility, followed by the priority of the samples coming in. Then there's a customer drop-down that lists all your customers, and each of these drop-downs allows for type ahead. And notice there's also a project section. It's grayed out right now because the selected customer has no projects, but if I were to select a customer that has a project, it will actually populate the project drop-down, and you can select from there. Notice there's also a delivery method and a tracking number. This information can be entered as well and gets tracked with the created work order. Underneath this is the sample details. This is the default data that is required for a sample in Titan. And if this information is used if it's not mapped below. So if you don't map classification down in the mappings below, then it will use the one selected here. Same goes for type. On the container side, a container must have a type. So I'm going to select plastic bottle, and if I don't map anything in this file down below to a container type, then it will use this plastic bottle. So now let's go down to the mappings of the file. You'll notice at the top that there's a header. This is showing the header data that came directly from the Excel file. And this is what we want to map into Titan. Below that is a drop-down for the mappable objects. You'll notice there's sample, sample type, site, subject, container, and container type. These are the supported types that you can import data to for this bulk sample import. Once you select your type, the drop-down below that is for the properties. This is going to list all of the properties available for the type selected. So if I were to change this from sample to say site, you'll notice that the drop-down is different. You don't have to map every single column. You can skip columns. So I'm going to actually skip a number of columns during this process just to show you kind of how this functions. You'll also notice that there's a default down below all of the mappings. This allows you to specify some data where if the import file does not contain any data for that column or for that row, then it will actually put in what you specify, and I'll show you that later on. So let's start mapping some of these. I'm going to skip the first two because they may not be important for me. So I'm going to go to sample number. I want it to come off of sample, which is the default, and that's going to be my field sample number. I'm not too interested in, say, the study ID or the center, so let's keep going. Now we have a subject ID. I know that's going to be mapped to subject in my system, so I'm going to select subject and locate subject ID. Same thing with initials, that's subject related, and I'm going to grab that as well. I'm just going to kind of continue this process of mapping this information all the way down. Now that I have the subject data mapped, let's keep going. Let's say that this visit description is something that we want to keep. We're not quite sure where we want to put that. So let's just go ahead and put that in comments for right now. This specimen description actually is going to map directly to our sample type. So if I select sample type, and then the property I want to map to is the name. Now notice that the collection date and the collection time are actually separate columns in our import file. Well, in Titan, the collect date time start, which is required, is actually one field. So we need to actually map these two into one. So by selecting collect date time start from the first one, and then selecting that same property from the second one, you'll notice that a dialog pops up. This is an ordering dialog, so you can determine the order of those columns being mapped into this single property or field. And right now I've got it set to date followed by time, which is the format I want. If I didn't like that format, I could change it using these arrows. I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to keep going. And let's say we want to map this comment. Remember that we also map that visit description as well. Well, let's say that we didn't want the visit description to come first and we wanted comments to come first. We can go ahead and select the comments, move it up, and now comments is going to come first when it gets mapped into the system. If you've made some changes or if you don't remember exactly how that ordering was done, you can at any time click on this A through Z button for each of these property drop-downs. When you do that, it will bring that dialog back up so you can make modifications if necessary. After you've completed this, you can save the template and give it a name. Now that template's been saved into the system, so if I have a file that's very similar to this, I can just load it back up and I won't have to worry about doing these mappings. I'll show you that in just a moment. At this point, you can now just import the file. Let me show you how it works when you actually use a template. I'm going to go back to that bulk sample import. I'm going to browse for the file I want to import. Click OK. It's going to load that data into my system. And now let's say I want to load a template. Let's say I've already gotten this file many different times and it's just another one coming in. So I'm going to go to load template. Let's say it's that top one. And notice that the mappings have now all been filled in. You'll notice that all the sample information has been filled in. All the subject information has been filled in. You've got the name of the sample type. You've also got the collect date time starts, and you've got your comments. So all of this bottom information gets saved in the template. The stuff that does not get saved in the template is the top information. This needs to be specified each and every time you use the bulk sample import. The nice thing about this tool is once you've done the import and you've got the work order created, Titan will actually attach the Excel file that you are importing from directly to that work order. So that way you'll know exactly where that data came from. And you'll have exact location of how that data came into the system. Trend analysis can be performed on any records in Titan. Basically, you can just select records and perform your trend analysis. But it makes the most sense doing a trend analysis on result data. So let's take a look at the results. Here's a listing of all the results in Titan. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select a few, and these are the results that are going to be used for our trend analysis by right-clicking and going to Trend Analysis. This brings up our Trend Analysis dialog, and now what we need to do is set up the properties for the trend analysis. First, I'm going to set my chart type to be line. I want my label property to be aliquot, and then I want to set my value property to be the numeric value. So this is going to show me the trend of my aliquots and my results based on their numeric values. You can also change the style of this trend analysis chart by just selecting from the drop-down of style. And there are a number of styles that are preset for your trend analysis. Now let's take a look at using the trend analysis for an even more powerful tool. I'm going to start filtering my data down to the aliquots that are normal aliquots, not QC aliquots. All normal aliquots start with WO. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually sort my results by the analyte, so that way I can group them in my trend analysis. All I'm doing now is I'm trying to get down to the records that I actually want to use for my trend analysis. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to select all the results from cadmium, calcium, and chromium. And I'm going to go ahead and hold down Shift and click. So now I've selected all those results. And I'm going to right click and go to Trend Analysis. This again will bring up our Trend Analysis dialog. And now I'm going to set the properties. First, my chart type. Again, I'm going to look at line. I'll set my label to be aliquot. and again my value to be the numeric value of those results. And you'll notice that this is looking a little bit different than what we probably want. We want this broken down by analyte. To do that, we can use the series property, and we'll select analyte. You'll notice that that breaks down our results based on the analytes: calcium, cadmium, and chromium. So we can take a look at the trend of multiple analytes all at the same time. Again, you can perform trend analysis on any records. So let's take a look at QC results. I'm going to go ahead and group my QC results by the QC type. And then I'm going to actually group it by the analyte as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at my continuing calibration verification, and let's take a look at our ammonia. So I'm going to take a look at all my percent recoveries and trend analysis that, just to take a quick look. Again, I've got my trend analysis dialog. I'm going to select my chart type. We'll stick with line because that's the easiest thing to take a look at. Again, we're going to go by aliquot, and the value on this one is going to be the numeric value. So now what we're doing is we're doing a trend analysis on the QC results. And you notice it's the same process, even though it's a different type of record. It's the same as dealing with regular results. So trend analysis is a powerful tool to use all throughout Titan wherever necessary. Electronic signatures can be configured in Titan under the Administration tab in Configuration, Electronic Signatures. Electronic signatures are configurable based on lifecycle objects and their transitions. So this lists all of the artifacts that are lifecycle artifacts and the states that they can be transitioned into. So for the example, an aliquot transitioning to analyzing, this determines whether or not it requires signature. This grid is directly editable, so we can just check that on or off as to whether or not we want this transition to require a signature. If we sort this by descending order for require signature, we can see all of the artifacts and transitions that currently require signatures in the system. So for example, a purchase order when transitioning to department approved requires an e-signature, as well as analysis batches transition to canceled. Let's make a change to work order. I'm going to filter this artifact list down to work order, and then whenever a work order is accepted, I'm going to go ahead and make that required for an e-signature. Now let's take a look at how that works in the system. As you recall, under the purchase orders, when you transition a purchase order to department approved, it requires an electronic signature based on our configuration. So currently we have this purchase order that is in the submitted state, and we're going to department approve it right now. So by right-clicking and transitioning to that department approved state, I'm prompted with the electronic signature dialog. At the top, it lists the reason for this electronic signature, which is transitioning the purchase order to department approved. It has my current username, and now I need to enter my Titan specific login and password information. So I'm going to type in my username and my password. Now it has been transitioned to department approved, and I have an electronic signature associated with it. If we take a look at that history, we'll see the history of the transitions for that object, and you'll notice that there's the one that we made right there. Now let's go to a work order, and let's transition one of these work orders to accepted. So I'm going to go to my transitions and go to accepted. Now when I accept a work order, there is some initial piece of information that it needs, whether or not I want to accept all samples. So I have to enter that before I'm prompted for my electronic signature. Now notice that I'm prompted again. Again, the signature reason is transitioning a work order to accepted. It has my current user full name. My username is now already pre-populated because I've already supplied an electronic signature during this session. So I don't have to re-enter that information. All that's required is my password. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my password again. That's going to transition that work order to the accepted state with the associated e-signature. If I were to log out of Titan and then log back in, I would have to re-enter that username again, and then of course my password. You'll notice I'm in the business section of Titan, and inside the administration there's a listing of storage locations. Currently there are none in the system, so let's start by creating a new storage location. There are a number of properties that are provided for a storage location. The name is just the name that you want to give to the storage location. So let's say I'm creating a freezer, and I'm going to call it Freezer 1. My storage location type is going to be freezer. This drop-down list is completely configurable to be whatever type of storage location types you'd like to use. I'm going to use freezer, and I'm going to give it a code of F0001 because this is freezer 1. I'm not going to give it a description, but you can if you'd like. And you'll notice that it has a facility. This is where this storage location is located. This is the root of the storage location, the facility. You'll notice here too that there's a manage checkbox, and if you check that, you're able to select an existing employee who manages that specific storage location. There's also a parent storage location. This is used when you cascade your storage locations with a parent-child relationship. So for example, a shelf might exist inside of a freezer, so the parent storage location of the shelf would be a freezer, and you'll see that throughout this demo. And you'll also notice that there's this path property. This path property has no data in it because the path hasn't been set until we've saved it. So let's save it. And you notice that the path now says main lab and then freezer. And this path property is very similar to the path property in a Windows file system. It's going to display the full path of how to get to that storage location. So for example, if we have a shelf inside a freezer at the main lab, you'd have main lab / freezer / shelf. And again, you're going to see this throughout the demonstration. So I'm going to go ahead and save and close this. And you'll notice that I have a storage location set up for freezer 1, code F0001. Let's go back into that storage location, and what we're going to do now is we're going to add child storage locations to this location. So like I described before, the freezer is going to have some shelves in it. So by going to this child storage location of the freezer and clicking on create, what I've done is I've automatically set the parent storage location property to be freezer 1, which is what I am currently on. So I'm going to create a shelf. I'm going to call this shelf 1. And my storage location type is going to be a shelf. And I can give it another code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use the freezer code and put a -S1, meaning shelf 1. Again, I'm not going to do a description, so I'm just going to save and close that. And you'll notice the path property is now main lab, freezer 1, shelf 1. So this tells you exactly how to get to this specific storage location. Let's add a couple more shelves. So we'll call this one shelf 2. Again, it's a type of shelf. And I'm going to use that same naming convention. I'm going to save that. I'll create one more. And if you happen to type in a code that already exists and you try to save, it's going to prompt you saying that that shelf code already exists. So we're going to need to change that. So I just mistyped that. Okay, so now we have 3 shelves inside of the freezer. Let's actually drill into shelf 1. And again, we're going to go to the child storage locations. And let's say for each shelf we're going to have some racks. So let's go ahead and create a rack. So we'll just call this one rack 1. And the type is rack, which I've already got in the system. And then for the rack, let's follow that same naming convention. So I'm in freezer 0001, I'm on shelf 1, and I'm now rack 1. So let me save and close that, and let's take a look at the path property. You'll see here that main lab is where it's rooted, that facility. It's in freezer 1, shelf 1, rack 1. So this tells us the full path to that. Let's just create one more rack. We'll call this one rack 2. Again, let's type rack. We'll follow that same naming convention. and we'll save and close that. Now let's say we want to put a box in that rack. So I'm going to again expand into that rack, and you're going to see that rack storage location. Here's its full path. And again, I'm going to go to the child storage locations, and I'm going to create a new one. This I'm just going to call box 1. My storage location type is going to be box. Again, I've already got that set in my system. And I'm going to just go ahead and code this as B0001. Now what I also want to do with this box is I want to subdivide it. This allows me to subdivide the storage location into a grid and then be able to specify inside that grid specific subdivisions in which I can place things like containers and aliquots. So under storage location subdivisions, I'm going to click on Has Subdivisions. My subdivision type is going to be a box divider. And now I can specify my vertical and horizontal dimensions. So let's say I have a 4x4 box. And let me go ahead and save that. Now you'll notice that under the subdivisions, you have a 4x4 grid showing you empty circles, meaning that there's no actual items inside of the subdivided box. So I'm going to go ahead and save and close that. Let me go ahead and create one more box. I'll call this one box 2. Again, it's type box. We'll use B0002. And then under your subdivisions, we'll subdivide this as well. Box divider. And let's make this one a 6x6. Save that. And notice now we have a 6x6 subdivided box. So you can have any size boxes inside of the storage location. So they're not really taking up capacity. The capacity is really just specified by these subdivisions. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. So now if we look at these paths, you'll see main lab, that's your facility, freezer 1, shelf 1, rack 1, box 1, and very similar path for box 2. So now we've got a nice setup of a freezer all the way down to boxes. And now if I go back to my storage location listing, you'll see that you can kind of determine where everything is just by looking at that path. So you can see right here how to get to whatever location you want to get to. I want to also show you now an easy way to access that sublocation, that storage location, using the quick launch. Up in the quick launch, remember we set up some of those codes. Let's say we wanted to barcode scan the box that we're currently working with. When you scan it, something like this will pop up, and by scanning that, what it's going to do is it's going to look through the system for any storage location that has that code, and if it finds it, it's going to bring the details up. So you notice I went right to box 0001, and we take a look at its subdivisions, and that's all. That's an easy way to access your storage location using the quick launch. Let's look at some of the other properties that we have on a storage location to familiarize yourself with it. So we've already looked at the child storage locations. This is going to show any other storage location that's inside of the current storage location. And this box is just on a shelf. It doesn't have anything else inside of it other than the subdivisions. So there's nothing here. Current containers is going to show us a list of all of the available containers on the left. These are all containers that have no storage location. And then on the right, it's going to show us all of the containers that are inside the current storage location. Currently, we don't have anything. Very similarly is for aliquots. So aliquots is going to show us the available aliquots, those not in any storage location, and the ones that we already have associated with this storage location. Current assets, same principle. Same thing with inventory items. So a storage location can store containers, aliquots, assets, and inventory items. And it can store them all at the same time. However, the subdivisions are only capable of storing containers, aliquots, and inventory items. So if I double click on one of these, this is bringing up the details of the subdivision. You'll notice that the storage location is that box. It's showing you your horizontal and vertical position. It's also showing you the current image, which is the empty image. And you notice that you can specify an aliquot, a container, or an inventory item. And this drop-down list is filtered based on the already associated aliquots, containers, and inventory items. So let's say I close this. I don't want to make my saves. And let's add a container. So let's just drag one of these containers. So now I've got one of the containers associated with this storage location. I'm going to go back to the subdivisions and refresh this. And now let's say I pick slot 22. And inside of this, I'm going to go to the container, and I'm going to go ahead and select the existing container. Notice that that is now available in the drop-down because it's already associated. If I save and close that, notice what's happened. An image has been replaced from that empty image with the image associated with that container. So for a container, basically what the system does is it takes a look at the container sample, and then what sample type that container is. And based on the sample type, it uses the appropriate image associated with it. So if we take a look at our sample types under the laboratory, and we go to sample types, you'll notice we have a bunch of images associated with each of our sample types. So for water, we have this image right here, and if we look back at our subdivision, we have that same image right here. So that's telling us that a container for a sample of type water is stored in this location. Very similarly for aliquots, the aliquot is going to look at its parent container sample and choose its sample type as well. Inventory items, on the other hand, take its image based on the product that that inventory item is associated with. So by configuring Titan to have the appropriate images, you can just take a quick look at this subdivision grid and be able to determine exactly what's inside that box or whatever storage location has those subdivisions. So that's a nice way of taking a look at what's inside. So what I'm going to do actually now is I'm going to just leave that there, and I'm going to show you how you can actually move things into this storage location in a much easier way than that manual process that I just showed you. So there are many different actions that you can fire off of a storage location. If I right click and go to actions, you'll see a number of different things that you can do. One of them is add containers. If I click on that, I've got a couple of options. First of all, I can decide to use subdivisions. If I do not check this, then all we're doing is making an association with the storage location. It's not actually going to do anything with subdivisions. But if I check that, what that means is we're going to try to add these containers to the storage location inside the first available subdivisions. So it's also going to do a volume check to make sure that we have enough room for what we're moving in. And you'll notice we've got this grid here. This is a grid to allow you to barcode scan your containers. So if you've got your containers all lined up on your desk, you can pick one up and scan it. I'm just going to simulate that here. And then what it'll do is it'll go to the next line, and you can then scan the next one, and so on. And then just click OK. And what that's going to do is it's going to take each one of those containers and move it into this storage location. And because I have the subdivisions checked, it's actually going to place them in order inside those subdivisions. The ordering is going to go from left to right, top to bottom. So it's going to go 1 1, 1 2, 1 3, 1 4, and then it's going to go 2 1. And then what it's going to do is when it gets to this 2 2, something's already there. So it's going to just skip that, and the next available one will be 2 3. So that's one way to get containers into this storage location. You'll notice under the actions as well, you can add the containers for samples. This is the same type of workflow where again you can check or uncheck whether or not to use those subdivisions. And then here you can actually scan sample numbers. This allows you to scan either the sample number generated by Titan or the field sample number associated with the samples. And it's going to do the same thing that it did with the containers, but for the containers on the samples scanned. Another option is to add containers for a work order. This is going to allow you to scan in a complete work order, and it's going to add every single container for every sample on that work order to the storage location. Again, if you have use subdivisions checked, it's going to actually do some capacity checking. So if you try to add a work order that has more containers in it than there are available subdivisions, then it's going to tell you that there's not enough room and not allow you to add all of those containers. You'll also notice there's move containers. What move containers allows you to do is it allows you to take all of the containers currently associated with this storage location and move them to a new storage location. Again, you've got this option of whether or not to use subdivisions. If this is not checked, it's going to just do the association. If it is checked, it's going to go ahead and try to place the containers in the first available subdivision spots. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and move all of the stuff from box 1 into box 2. Now we only have one item, but let's see what that does. Okay, so I've executed that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go directly to box 2 using my quick launch. Here I'm in box 2, and if I look at my subdivisions, notice what's happened. It's placed that water sample for that container right in spot 1-1. It was in 2-2 of the other box, and it moved it to 1-1 because that was the first available slot. So that's one way of moving items between containers. Another one of the actions that you have is set parent location. So this is a box. What this set parent location allows you to do, it would allow you to take the entire box and move that to, let's say, a new rack or another freezer. Or maybe you're taking that box out and you've got a storage location set up for your bench where you're actually going to do your analysis work. You can actually scan in the code for that storage location and say okay, and what's actually going to happen is everything inside the box is going to remain the same, but the box itself is going to change its parent storage location, in essence moving that box to that other storage location. And this one just takes a barcode scan. There is one other action under storage location that we didn't cover, which is refresh images. This is useful if you have changed the images for the types already specified. So let's say you change the water image for the sample type and you want to reflect that change here. You would just refresh those images and that would reflect that change. So that's how you can do some pretty simple manipulation, but then there's other ways of getting that information and moving containers and aliquots and that sort of thing into storage locations. One of them is by batches. So let's go to an analysis batch. I'm bringing up the list of analysis batches. So inside this analysis batch, let's just take a quick look at what's inside of it. There are 15 aliquots already associated with this analysis batch. What we can do is we can right click on this analysis batch, go to actions, and you'll notice that there's a move aliquots. This is bringing up another familiar workflow screen where you can decide whether or not you want to use subdivisions, and then you've got a location code. So what this is going to allow us to do is this is going to allow us to take all of the aliquots that are currently on this batch and move them into a storage location. I'm going to go ahead and put use subdivisions, and I'm going to select that first box. I'm going to say OK. And what this is doing is this is actually physically moving all of those aliquots from that batch into that storage location. Because there's 15 of them, there's quite a number of operations to perform to move all of that. And then what I'm going to do is, once all of those aliquots have been moved over into that new location, I'm going to go ahead and quick launch to that box so we can take a look. So I'm going to open up box 1, take a look, and you'll notice that all of those images have been filled up with that water because that's water type. And so we've got one free spot open for our for this subdivided box. Similarly, with analysis batches, you can move its aliquots. You can do the same thing for aliquot preparation batches. So if I right click and go to actions, you'll see there's a move aliquots. Again, it's prompting you with the same type of parameters for this workflow. I'm going to go use subdivisions. I'm going to go ahead and put that box again, and you remember that we only had one free slot. Well, there are more than one aliquots on this batch. And let me show you what happens when we try to do that. You're immediately prompted saying there's not enough empty subdivisions for the one that we wanted to move to. And it's also nice that it prompts us and shows us that we're trying to move 5 aliquots into one available subdivision. So that gives us an idea of how much room we have, so we know, oh yeah, there's really not room for that box and we can try someplace else. So what I'll do is I'll change that to box 2. And once this operation finishes as well, I'm going to go back to that quick launch and I'm going to open up box 2 so you can see what's happened there. So here's box 2. If we look at the subdivisions, let's refresh that to make that a little bit bigger. And you'll notice it started in slot 1, 2 because we already had a water sample here. And so now it's putting the surface water, in this case, samples next to it. And it's just going to fill that in to wherever there's enough room for that. There's a couple of other places where you can move things around with storage locations. Another one is just directly from the samples themselves. So you can highlight whatever samples you'd like, right-click, go to Actions, and you can move to a location. Again, very similar, same type of functionality, where we can click on the Use Subdivisions or Not, and we specify our location code, and what it's going to do is for each one of those samples that have been selected, it's going to move that into the location. One more thing that I'd like to show is under our dashboard control. Under the dashboard, let me just move that into my application, there's this container count dashboard control. So let me actually make that bigger. Under the settings, we can specify some different settings on what we want to look at. So if we want to look at a comparison between boxes, we select box here and we go back and we notice that box 2 has a number of containers, has actually 1 container, and box 1 doesn't have any. We could change those settings, take a look at freezers, and basically we only have 1 freezer in this system and it's only got 1. Now this one is specifically just for containers, so this is going to show you your container information. Let's go over to one of our freezers, or let's go to one of our boxes actually. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and actually just associate a couple of containers over here. So I'm just going to drag a few of these containers over. So now these are just associated. Even though this is a box and is subdivided, we haven't actually associated the subdivision that each one of these containers is located. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually open up the other box. I'm going to go to containers there, and I'm going to put a few containers on this box as well. Now I'm going to go back to my dashboard. I'm going to change my settings. I'm going to change it back to box. And now you'll see that I've got 5 containers in box 1 and I've got 8 containers in box 2. So this is a nice way to kind of see what kind of storage capacities you've got on your storage locations. All captions in Titan are able to be customized to fit the needs of your laboratory. So if you use different terminology, you don't need to change the system, you just need to change some captions. Titan also comes equipped with a number of places where user-defined fields are already set aside for this specific case. For example, under Customers, you'll notice that there are a number of user-defined properties. There are actually 10. And you'll notice that in this case, one of our customers is using that user-defined 1. Let's say they were using that user-defined 1 for a special client number. So what we want to do is we want to actually utilize user-defined 1 as a client number and specify that in the UI. To do that, we need to run the caption editor off of the application server. On the application server, if you browse to your program files, go to Accelerated Technology Laboratories, ATL Titan, you'll notice a caption editor application. Let's run that. This brings up a dialog for entering in custom caption information. The top drop-down is for the object that you're editing. In this case, we want to do customer. You can use the drop-down to locate the customer, or you can use type ahead and select customer. Notice what's happened is the captions have changed up at the top here, and the list of properties is changed to match that of the customer. Let's scroll down to look for that user-defined one, and there it is. This first column is the property name, which cannot be changed. This is the mapping that we're going to be changing. The caption is what we actually want to change. So in this case, let's change that to client number. The third column just specifies what type that property is, and this is useful when you want to just filter using the property types down below. The last column is showing whether or not that property should be visible. This is important when you want to hide properties that you'll never use. In this case, for the customer, we have 10 user-defined fields, but we only want to use one. The others are not important, we'll never use them. So let's actually hide them all. By unchecking that visible column on each one of those user-defined, this will hide those columns. This will just clean up the UI and make it easier to look at things. Let's go ahead and save that. If I go back to the Titan application, you'll notice that nothing's changed, even if I click refresh. Custom captions do not refresh until you restart the application, so let's do that. I'm going to close it down and restart it. Now when I go over to the business section and go open up my list of customers, you'll notice that none of those extra user-defined fields are visible, and the user-defined one has actually changed to client number, exactly how we set it. If I open up one of these customers and I go to the user-defined, there's only that single field for the client number. We also have the ability to actually change the object names themselves. So let's say we didn't want to call these customers, we wanted to actually call them clients. Going back to the custom caption editor, I'm going to go up at the top at these caption and plural caption and change that to be client and clients. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Again, I'm going to have to restart my application so those custom captions take hold. And now when we go into the business section, you'll notice that customers is no longer specified. Instead it says clients, exactly how we set it. If I open up that, you'll notice that it says clients in the tab and clients as this header. And if I open up one of these records, it says client instead of customer. Now let's take a look at work order. You'll notice under the work order listing, we still have customer specified. That's because we've just changed the object name and we've changed just some of the captions on the user-defined. We have not changed the relationship to work order. If we want to do that, we need to do that specifically. Let me go back to the caption editor, and this time I'm going to select work order. And you'll notice that for customer, the caption is still customer. So even though we changed the object name to client, it hasn't been changed everywhere. This needs to be done in order to make that change visible everywhere throughout the system. So I'm going to go ahead and change the caption for customer off of work order to client. I'm going to save that, and again I'm going to have to restart my application just to see those changes. So if I go back under business, I still have client here, but if I open up work orders, you'll notice that client is now the header for where customer was. And if I were to open up one of these work orders, you'll also notice that client is the caption instead of customer. So you can change all of these headings, all of these labels, all of these captions by using the custom caption editor.